Okay, hello everybody. After a longer break, I'm actually back. I want to talk about a controversial question today, namely about Darwin and evolution. Well, is it controversial? I don't think it's very controversial. It's made controversial by creationists. Well, I'm not a creationist. Still, I have some questions about evolutionary theory, how it works. And for a book, like an introduction to the history of Western civilization, we're actually writing a chapter about that right now. And I just want to read the Stanford article to inform myself, and maybe we read that together. Okay, let's look into it. So, evolution in its contemporary meaning in biology typically refers to the changes in the proportions of biological types in a population over time. So, evolution means that something changes in a biological type. I don't think that's very controversial, right? And okay, they say, what else do they say? They say it's a very broad issue, so they cannot discuss everything here, but the primary goal is to serve as a broad overview of contemporary issues in evolution with links to other entries. Okay, and then we start with a brief definition and then discussion of different modes of evolution. So let's see at the definition. The definition of evolution is given at the outset of this entry is very general. There are more specific ones. Okay. let's see what definition they give. Although the works of Charles Darwin is usually starting point for contemporary understanding of evolution, interestingly, he does not use the term of evolution. Instead, he refers to a descent with modification. Okay, in the early mid-20th century, the modern synthesis gave birth to population genetics, which provided a mathematization of Darwin's evolutionary theory in light of Mendelian genetics. See also ecological genetic. This yielded a prevalent, probably the most prevalent understanding of evolution as any change in the frequency of alleles. I remember that from my biology class. This is somehow related to the genome, but I guess in Mendel's evolutionary theory, they didn't have genes yet, right? So they had to call it alleles, I guess. So, but yeah, I'm tapping here a bit in the dark, right? Within a population from one generation to the next. Note, however, that this definition refers to evolution only in a microevolutionary context, and that doesn't refer to the emergence of new species and their new characteristics, although it is intended to underlie those macroevolutionary changes. Okay, this is very interesting. I remember we had Mendel's experiments, and he did something with beans and how the phenotype was changing. So this was probably something related to changes within one species. So when we look at macroevolution, then it refers to evolutionary patterns and processes above the species level. So we speak here about species levels. And please correct me if I say anything wrong. It is usually contrasted with microevolution or evolutionary change within populations. This customary way of drawing the micro-micro distinction is not perfect. However, because species sometimes consist of multiple populations, some evolutionary processes, such as the spread of a trait from one population to another, might count as within species processes, but not within population processes. Okay, so we see here that it's already a little bit difficult because I think that creationists, as far as I talked with them, they refer to everything as microevolution, but they denied macroevolution. And microevolution we can probably easily observe. So in a popular textbook, Douglas Futuyama gives a more expansive definition. Biological evolution is a change in the properties of groups of organisms over the course of generations. It embraces everything from slight changes in proportions of different forms of a gene within a population to the alteration that led from the earliest organisms to dinosaurs, bees, oaks, and humans. Note also that Futuimas, yeah, difficult name, unlike the population genetics definition, does not limit itself to changes in alleles. John Endler's definition is similar in this respect, and I have to look up alleles now. Okay, here we go. So an allele is one of two or more versions of DNA sequence, a single base or a segment of bases at a given genomic location. An individual inherits two alleles, one from each parent for any given genomic location where such variation exists. If the two alleles are the same, the individual is homozygous for that allele. Oh my god, these words are difficult. But I remember that this is already part of Mendel, right? Okay, so I'm not an expert, and I'm really trying to get into this topic here to understand it better. So evolution may be defined as any net directional change or any cumulative change in the characteristics of organisms or populations over many generations. In other words, descent with modification. So that was the term that Darwin used, right? It explicitly includes the origin as well as the spread of alleles, variants, trait values, or character states. So why is this important here? I don't even understand that. Why are the alleles here so important? And why is the definition so complicated? I would say evolution is the change of a species over time that turns it into a different species, but that seems not to be what it is. Yet even this definition is not expansive enough. Molecular evolution focuses on the molecular changes within macromolecules such as DNA and RNA. In a very different vein, Lane van Walen characterizes evolution as the control of development by ecology. This anticipates those who emphasize the importance of development in evolution, including proponents of evo-devo, evolution and development. Today, some have called for an extended evolutionary synthesis in light of developmental biology and recent findings in evolutionary biology. And I'm really a bit confused here. Shouldn't evolutionary theory be much more easy to understand? So evolution and development. The relationship between development and evolution has recently become a lively debate topic among philosophers and biologists. So recently is the 1990s, I guess. This interest has been increasingly stirred through at least 4 developments since the 1990s. First, through new findings of the molecular genetic mechanisms underlying the development and evolution of all morphological forms in multicellular organisms. So I wonder what that development is, but they say this discovery eventually led to the foundation of the new field of evolutionary developmental biology, evo-devo. Second, the ability to rapidly sequence genes and genomes allowed genetic comparisons to be made between species. Okay, it's all a little bit complicated to me. I'm just a philosopher. So I asked ChatGPT. Okay, so I didn't understand evo-devo and evolutionary theory and why there's not, I didn't understand the explanation of ChatGPT. You can read that, but I don't understand why that is important, so I have to ask that again. But let's look here. So why is there no simple definition of evolution? Evolution is a complex and multifaceted concept, and this complexity is reflected in the difficulty of providing a single simple definition. Here's why. So there are multiple mechanisms. Evolution involves several mechanisms such as natural selection, genetic drift, gene flow, and mutation. These mechanisms can operate in various combinations and lead to different outcomes, making it challenging to encapsulate all of them in a single definition. So what do we have here? Natural selection, okay, that seems to be the pressure to survive. Then genetic drift, gene flow, and mutation. Also, I guess the genes are not just simply mutating, but there's also gene drift, I guess, when there is sexual contact or reproduction. So levels of evolution. Evolution can be discussed at different levels, including molecular evolution, changes in the DNA sequence, Microevolution, changes within a population, and macroevolution, large-scale changes leading to new species. Each level has its own complexity, further complicating a simple definition. Historical and theoretical complexity. Evolutionary theory has evolved over time, incorporating new ideas and evidence. Concepts like evo-devo, there it is again, punctuated equilibrium, and the modern synthesis have added layers of understanding that resist simplification. Okay, I want to know again, like, why is evo-devo so important? Why is evo-devo so important? And explain it to a high schooler. Evo-devo is important because it helps us understand how small changes in the development of organisms can lead to the big differences we see between species. It's like discovering how tweaking a recipe can result in a whole new dish. Yeah, scientists in this field study how the genes that control development, like the growth of limbs and organs, etc., can change over time, leading to the evolution of new features in animals and plants. I mean, I remember that, like, I had a discussion in church, and someone told me, or maybe the microphone is a bit too loud. Let's put it a little bit here. He told me, like, how can it be? Oh, I think I'm too loud. I need to change that for a second. So yeah, when one comes back, then it's a little bit more difficult to adjust the microphone, right? Anyway, I remember like somebody from church, he was saying like, you want to tell me that like the complexity of the eye just occurs through a random mechanism. And I saw other very highly decorated scientists in the United States who were creationists, and they were always arguing that when not all mechanisms are in place at one point, something like an eye would just not develop, or there was a specific mechanism of how something of some information was transmitted in a cell. So, and that was the major argument, basically. So, and I think this is a bit of the problem here. That the question is, well, how can such changes really occur? And scientists in this field study how the genes that control development, like the growth of limbs, organs, can change over time, leading to the evolution of new features. And now, imagine you're building something with Lego bricks. You have instructions that tell you how to put the bricks together to create a specific model, like a car or spaceship. Now, what if you change a few steps in the instruction? Maybe you add a few more wheels, change the shape of the wings, or use different colors. Suddenly you have a totally new design. Evo-devo is kind of like that, but instead of Lego instructions, we're talking about the genetic instructions that guide how animals and plants grow and develop from an embryo to an adult. Scientists in Evo-devo look at how changes in these genetic instructions can lead to the evolution of new features, like how birds got their wings or how flowers evolve different shapes and colors. And that's exactly the question, like, how can you suddenly have something that has wings and flies from something that does not have wings and flies, right? So Evo-devo gives us insight into how evolution happens on a deeper level. Instead of just looking at the end result, it helps us understand the process of getting there by studying how development changes over time. Explaining diversity, Evo-devo helps explain why there is such a huge variety of life on Earth. By studying how different species develop, we learn how slight changes in the developmental process can lead to big differences in appearance and function. Traditional evolutionary biology and developmental biology used to be studied separately. Okay, Evo-devo connects these two fields, showing that to understand evolution fully, we need how organisms develop from a single cell to a complex being. So I want to know, what is developmental biology, right? Seems to be important too. Is the branch of biology that studies how living organisms grow and develop from a single cell into a fully formed adult. It focuses on the process that occur during the formation and development of tissues, organs, and overall body structure. Oh. So it seems also this process can change. Well, yeah, you see, evolution is a very complex issue. I wanna look again into the original article now that we are here a little bit better. The control of development by ecology. This anticipates those who emphasize the importance of development in evolution, including proponents of evo-devo. Today, some have called for an extended evolutionary synthesis in light of developmental biology and other recent findings in evolutionary biology. Although this entry focuses on biological evolution, philosophers and biologists have also sought to extend evolutionary ideas to the cultural realm, figuring out how and whether to extend the definition of evolution to this realm is part of the study of cultural evolution. Yeah, so we also have cultural evolution, right? In spite of this diversity of definitions, there has been very little philosophical analysis of the term evolution itself. This dearth forms a stark contrast to the voluminous literature in the philosophy of evolution. Indeed, for a long time, the philosophy of biology was focused almost entirely on evolution. Thankfully, that is no longer the case, with philosophers turning their attentions to issues in genetics, molecular biology, cell biology, ecology, developmental biology, microbiology, and more. It may be a Theodosius Dobzhansky famously said that nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. But much of biology is not evolutionary biology. Still, though, philosophy of evolution remains a grown and vibrant area within the philosophy of biology. Philosophy of evolution. That I have to look into that too. Okay, here are some key questions of the philosophy of evolution. Basically, there is no strict definition, and the question is what it should include. So, for example, there's cultural evolution of ideas and the movement towards technology, like the singularity is near. Are these things also part of evolution? And then also the question, is evolution teleological? This question explores whether evolution has a direction or purpose, or if it is random, undirected process driven by purely natural selection and other mechanisms. Yeah, this, I mean, like evolutionary biologists, they always tell me immediately it's not teleological. And I wonder why, right? Okay, evolution and human nature. How does evolution influence human behavior? Philosophers consider the extent to which human behaviors, including moral and social behaviors, are shaped by evolutionary processes. This leads to discussions about the biological basis of ethics and whether our moral values are products of evolution. Nietzsche's genealogy of morals that appeared briefly after the interventions of Charles Darwin, I guess. I don't know what is the relation, but the idea is that morals are nothing but a result of the evolution before. Free will versus determinism. The idea that human actions are influenced by evolutionary pressures raises questions about free will, etc., etc. The status of evolutionary theory. Is evolution a scientific law? So, or is it a framework or just a well-supported theory? They explore how it fits into the broader philosophy of science and its status compared to theories in physics, for example. Reductionism versus holism. This debate enters on whether evolutionary biology can be fully explained by the interaction of genes and molecules, or whether it requires a more holistic approach that considers entire organisms and their environments. Like a lot of words, I pronounce them very badly, I know. So evolution versus creationism. I mean, I'm not a fan of creationism, but I also want to say flat out that it's wrong, right? The meaning of life, that's another question, evolutionary ethics. Then we come to social Darwinism. Yeah, so it seems there are many things to be discussed in that regard, right? So we stay here. Like, I want to finish a little bit more of this capital. It is essential to understand that biologists recognize many ways that evolution can occur, evolution by natural selection being just one of them. Although it is often held to be the most prevalent one, evolution can also occur through genetic drift, mutation, or migration. So natural selection is not the only way of how evolution actually occurs. That's very, very, very interesting. So we also have genetic drift, mutation, or migration. And I actually want ChatGPT to explain this to me. So we ask ChatGPT again. Okay, this is very interesting because here's the differentiation of these four. So, of course, the natural selection first. The peppered moth in England. During the Industrial Revolution, pollution darkened the trees, and the darker colored melanic moths were better camouflaged from predators compared to the lighter colored moths. Over time, the darker moths became more common because they were less likely to be eaten, demonstrating natural selection. So that's even the example that I had in my biology classes. But now we come to the interesting exceptions. The bottleneck effect in cheetahs. Cheetah populations have experienced significant reductions in numbers due to various factors, leading to a bottleneck where only a small number of individuals survive. The genetic variation in the population is greatly reduced, and the traits of the survivors, not necessarily due to better adaptation, become more prevalent purely by chance. Okay, so I guess that's very mathematical. I think I also want to see for the genetic drift, there was like an example of a volcano erupting or something. Okay, here we have a more concrete example. It's genetic drift. So in the 19th century, northern elephant seals were hunted to near extinction, with the population reduced to as few as 20 individuals. Due to this severe population bottleneck, that genetic diversity of the species was drastically reduced. Today, all northern elephant seals are descended from that small group, and as a result, they have a very low genetic variation. This low diversity is not due to natural selection, but rather the random chance of which individuals survive the hunting period. An example of genetic drift. But I want a better example still. Okay, here we have a crazy example. I wonder whether that is true. Polydactyl in the Amish population. The Amish population in Pennsylvania is relatively isolated and was founded by a small group of individuals. Among these founders, there was a higher frequency of the genetic mutation that causes polydactyly, having extra fingers or toes. Due to the small population size and limited gene pool, this mutation became more common within the community over generations. This increase in the frequency of the polydactyl trait occurred during the genetic drift rather than because it provided a survival or reproductive advantage. The trait spread through the population by chance, illustrating how genetic drift can lead to the development of persistence of a new feature in a population. So I just want more examples. I find that so interesting. So blue eyes in human beings. Blue eye color in humans is thought to have originated from a single mutation that occurred around 6 to 10,000 years ago. This trait spread among Euro populations not because it provided a survival advantage, but likely due to genetic drift. In small isolated communities, the gene for blue eyes became more common simply by chance, eventually leading to the higher prevalence of blue eyes in certain regions. This is very example. Then blood type distribution in Danka religious communities. So it's again a small group in Pennsylvania who have remained relatively isolated. Genetic studies have shown that the distribution of blood types within this community differs significantly from that of the general population. This variation is not due to natural selection, but rather to genetic drift. The silver-eye bird in New Zealand. The silver-eye bird colonized by New Zealand and surrounding islands in several waves within each new population founded by a small number of individuals. As a result, these populations display differences in traits like song patterns and body size. These differences arose through genetic drift, where the traits of the small founding groups became more common in subsequent generations. Okay, the high prevalence of retinitis pigmentosa. Okay, remote island, and there were just a few families, and they had like this kind of degenerative eye disease, and then because of genetic drift, more of these have this degenerative eye disease. Wait, I read the example with a bird too quickly. So, like, what do they actually have? Oh, they have different body size and different songs. So what else do we have? Mutation. So here we have example antibiotic resistance in bacteria. Bacteria can develop resistance to antibiotics through mutation in their DNA. For instance, a mutation might allow a bacterium to survive in the presence of an antibiotic. This resistant bacterium can then reproduce, spreading the mutation through the population, leading to the evolution of antibiotic-resistant strains. But I don't understand, isn't that natural selection? Let me just ask. Isn't mutation actually natural selection? A mutation is a change in the DNA sequence of an organism's genome. Mutations can occur due to various factors, such as copying errors during cell division, exposure to certain chemicals, or radiation. Mutations introduce new genetic variations in a population. Natural selection is the process through which traits that enhance an organism's chances of survival and reproduction become more common in populations over time. It acts on the variation provided by mutations and other genetic mechanisms. Natural selection filters the genetic variation produced by mutations. Traits that offer some advantage. Yeah, so they at least interact, right? So what I don't understand, can natural selection be independent of mutation? Interdependent process in evolution. But in theory, natural selection can act independently of new mutations if there's already existing genetic variation in a population. Here's how they interact and when natural selection might appear to operate independently of new mutations. Existing genetic variations. Okay. Well, mutation, that seems to me pretty much a part of natural selection, or I don't know how mutation should lead to evolution without natural selection. Migration, gene flow. So when European colonists arrived in the Americas, they brought with them genes that were previously uncommon in the native populations. Over time, inbreeding between the European settlers and Native American populations introduced new genetic traits into the gene pool, altering the genetic makeup of the population. But again, isn't that also like due to natural selection, or is it because there are now different genes that come together so that there are new traits emerging? I guess, right? So sexual selection. Male peacocks have long, colorful tail feathers that they display to attract females. These feathers don't necessarily help the peacocks survive, but are preferred by females during mate selection. Males with more extravagant tails are more likely to reproduce, leading to the evolution of these traits through sexual selection. Okay, so what I actually want to know is like, how are there some traits that are not necessarily a survival advantage that still somehow develop? And I think I found some examples in these today. Like, I think the most prevalent was the idea of a genetic drift, where evolution does not just work according to, oh, it's because they have a better fit or something. So that's interesting. Please let me know, like, what were the mistakes in my introductory readings of evolutionary theory. I think it's certainly interesting, and I hope it was interesting for you too. So live long, mutate, evolve, and prosper.